This is a starting point for our speech for the Year 10 Journeys Area of Study unit. What you do know is you have to deliver a 4-minute speech, and what you have to do is you have to talk about 2 texts. So I've got here that we're going to talk about the novel Maestro, plus one related choice or related text of your own choosing. So that can be something that we've studied in class, or you may have done a text last year, one of the novels or film studies that you did, and you can use that to complement your understanding of what we've been exploring in Maestro. Okay, so what we need to do when we're sort of planning our ideas for the speech is to focus on a concept. So remember, this is an area of study, so we're looking at the concept of journeys, and then what we do once we've explored the concept is we narrow in and we give examples from the novel and the related text. So what I've done on the board here is I've just come up with a whole range of things that might be applicable. And what you're going to do is you're going to try and find one, or hopefully two key ideas that you can weave through your texts. So I've got here identity, justice, challenge, innocence, freedom, belonging, power. I've got realisation here, and I've put underneath it that there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. So you could trace the character development of someone like Paul and look at how Paul thinks he knows everything, but when he comes to the point of realisation in his life, he has understanding, and there is a distinct difference between the two. Certainly a lot of journey stories are about discovery, and sometimes it's through experimentation. So it's through trial and error and those serendipitous moments. It could also be about the power of memory and using memory to reflect on events that have occurred, and that allows you to better understand things. Over here I've also got perspective, conformity, popularity. So all these sort of things play on the themes and the characters in the stories that we look at. So what you need to do is find something that you want to talk about. So I think with Maestro, I really want to look at this idea of this innocence and then this movement to understanding. So I might use that as my lens, or I might want to really focus on identity and how Paul discovers his true identity as he matures throughout his life. And basically what we'll do is we'll find these ideas, and then we'll come through and we'll tease out some examples from the novel Maestro. And then when you look at your related text, there are a couple things that you can do. You can find a text and say, I like this idea of Maestro, and my related text is exactly the same. And that's totally fine. But you might find that there's nothing in the text that you find, nothing that relates to Maestro, and that's totally fine too, because we're talking about this concept of journeys, and it might be about how we gain a sense of belonging, and the 2 texts might differ completely, but they'll give you a lot to talk about. So either way is totally fine. So they don't have to mirror each other at all. You might say in Maestro, Paul gains his sense of belonging through and then you might say, whereas in the film or the poem or whatever it is that you're studying, it is a completely different process that occurs, and that makes for a really good topic for a speech. Now, with the related text, there are many different texts that you can use. So you can use another novel, there's no problem with that, or you can use a film, a poem, a documentary. Some students might use an artwork. They might have a painting, for example, that has a lot of background to it. So it tells a really strong story, but the student's able to talk about the artist and where they came from and why they came to make that piece of art. Or you could use a picture book as well and look at the visual literacy of that. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at the 2 texts. So whether it's your core text, Maestro, or your related text, this is the type of thing that you have to do for each. So for your text, what you'll have to do is come up with a concept. And so I've put here that physical journeys lead to new understandings about a person's identity. And that was one of the bubbles, that identity. And the fact that Paul goes on this physical journey where he moves from one end of Australia right to the other end, he's able to come to a new understanding of who he is, because he's in this harsh, uncomfortable environment. He also travels around the world, and on return he discovers things about himself as well. What you're then going to do is you're going to place the novel in context. So it was in the 1960s in Australia. So you look at that time, and also we were looking at Darwin and the impact of the culture in Darwin, which was completely opposite to the culture of Melbourne and of Vienna. Once we sort of place it in context, we're going to provide some examples that talk about how the journeys that Paul's been on lead to a greater understanding of who he is as a person. So that's where we'll come in and find probably 3 scenes in the story that we're able to talk about and deconstruct. And we're going to support that, obviously, so here we're going to provide quotes. So that our examples, we're going to find some quotes that we're able to use to support what we're saying. And that's going to marry into this idea of technique of form. So for Maestro, it's a novel. So we're going to be looking at all the things that work, and you'll pick a couple of things that sort of differentiate it from other forms. So it might be the structure of the novel, that there are 7 parts to it. They mimic the developmental stages of Paul. It might be the use of narration, that Paul is the narrator of his own story. You might look at character development. You might look at the contrast. This contrast is used a lot, isn't it? It's used between the cities that Paul visits, so Melbourne, Adelaide, Darwin, Vienna, but it also might be the characters and the choices that he has to make. So there's a huge contrast between Paul's parents and Keller, for example. Paul's mum and dad are different too, aren't they? We looked at that the other lesson. And that's what allows for a good story to occur. Paul's got to make a big choice between Keller and Rosie at a point in the novel, and these all are things that we're able to sort of tease out. So for example, if we were using another related text and it was a film, we'd be looking at technique of form, where we would be doing camera angles and a lot of things that happen in a narrative of a story happen in a film too, don't they? So we could be looking at symbolism. I think this might be off the page actually. Symbolism. We might look at the themes in the story. We might look at a whole range of things. The use of voiceover, sound effects, lighting, all those type of things. If it happened to be a picture book, we'd be using both visual features, so our visual literacy, and our normal literary features. So this, in the visual, we might be talking about vectors and the use of colour and contrasting colours and positioning of characters, or size, foreground, background, all those terms. And then the literary techniques, there might be similes and metaphors and symbols and things like that in it as well. So that gives us a bit of an idea of how we go about working our way through the text. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're just going to look at a very quick structure for how we will develop our argument. So what we'll do for that is we'll simply structure it this way, where we'll talk about, we'll obviously have an introduction, and then we'll talk about Maestro, and we'll have idea number 1. So that might be about discovery. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about our related text, and we'll do the same. We'll try and marry these ideas together. So we're saying they're both about identity, and so you'll talk about Maestro, and then what you'd say is, similar to Maestro, my related text explores identity in the notion of, or you might say, in comparison to Maestro, this related text explores identity in a different fashion. Okay? And what that does is it allows you just to make subtle connections in relation to the concepts. Okay? And that's the important thing. So we're not saying, oh, the characters are the same. We're actually saying that the concept, this one explores the concept in this way, this one does it in another. And then what we're going to do once we've done that, so we've got an introduction, paragraph on Maestro, paragraph on the related text, and then what we're going to do is we're going to blend. We're going to have a blended paragraph. So in this paragraph, we're going to talk about Maestro and our related text, but we're going to do it through the lens of another concept. Okay, and this concept might have to do with understanding or this sense of belonging. You've just got to pick something and talk about them together. And then obviously at the end we'll have a conclusion as well. So that's our structure. And then next time what we'll do is we'll look at the different types of rhetorical devices that we can use when we're writing and then delivering our speech. Because in essence we're doing an exposition like an essay, but we need to make it look like a speech. So we'll be using things like rhetorical questions and scenarios or hypothetical situations and a whole range of things, but that's for next time.